Hi guys, what up, Viper here, and today we're back with another parallel video, and I want to talk about the currently best Paragon in the game, the currently best deck in the game, that I believe, even if they make some small changes, is gonna stay around like a tier 1, tier 1.5 deck until probably the next expansion is gonna hit. So first of all, what are we looking at, right? We're looking at Escapius Magnus Alpha as our Paragon. And the guy is a 5 mana 3/3. He says master trigger all non-Paragon master abilities that you have activated this game with targets chosen randomly. And the passive is whenever you bank a unit, you summon a 0/1 clone, which is very helpful because it's a free unit and there's a lot of good stuff that you can do with that. And the master of the Paragon is essentially used as mostly card draw, because the masters that you play is standard. Like, this is the core of the deck, this is what you usually play, and then you add some cards depending on how the meta is currently looking. Those standard masters are the Convergent Recruiter, which lets you look at the top 4 cards of your deck, and you take a clone from them and add it to your hand, and you can take a clone and a Convergent if there's a Convergent in there as well. And the other one is Magna, which is like a pretty unique card in the deck because it is basically the only good reactive tool that you have in this core of the deck. What I mean with reactive tool, most of this core, most of the strategy of the deck is built around just playing a lot of stats on the board and overwhelming your opponent with those stats. But you don't really have anything that says deal damage, send to the top of the deck, remove, reduce attack, or anything like that. You don't really have much utility going for yourself. You only play a lot of stats and a lot of units. Magna is the exception because it has a choose one between deal damage equal to this unit's attack. It's actually incorrect, it's not updated on the website. Got nerfed to dealing 3 damage specifically to an enemy unit at your choosing, and then the other option, draw a card, and the third option, deal 1 damage to the enemy. The clutch thing is, if a friendly Cathari unit was destroyed on the enemy's last turn, you do all of those. And well, your deck is mostly Cathari units and your token is the Cathari unit as well, so oftentimes you will do all 3 of them. And then you have a card that is called Triumph of Europa, which lets you replay units from your waste once only nowadays. Got nerfed as well in that regard. But this essentially still means that you can have a second summon of Magna, which means that your Scipius Magnus Alpha is going to have 2 activations of it, aka dealing 2 times damage, drawing 2 times cards often. So the idea is, and that is why all of these cards are so cheap, mana cost wise, that you just play a lot of cheap and efficient cards, you overwhelm the opponent with a lot of stats, and then you have a lot of these card draw options with the Magna, with the Recruiter, and then your Scipi is gonna recast all those masters as well. So how does the deck really work? If you have watched the recent video before, you have a basic idea, but let's cover this as well. You have 6 1-mana cards, right? And they're just good stated cards. For 1-mana card, there's nothing much to mention here. They are clones though, which unlocks the other synergies. But then we look at the 2 jobs and we see, for example, Cunning Scipion. At the end of your turn, you create a 1/1 Cathari iterant, also a clone. So at the end of every turn, you get an additional unit if your opponent is not contesting, removing this, or negating the effect somehow. The other 2 job, whenever you play a friendly clone, it gains +1/+1. This includes your passive, so if you spend 2 mana playing this, you bank a card, you summon a 1/2 instead, then you can, for example, play a 1-drop, and you already got 2 times the buff value, and the card is still a persistent threat on the board because it's going to buff everything else that you play. Subjugate, similar version, but whenever you play a clone, you can choose something that gets +1/+1. Incredibly powerful if you already have a unit on the board from last turn that is able to attack, because then you can buff that unit and take advantageous trades, or you can push a lot of damage. Then you have, for example, the Drusian Accelerator. Very simple text. Other friendly clones have +2/+1. Means if you have a lot of clones on the board, which your deck does, right? The deck has this guy that summons another dude every turn. You have a 2-mana card that draws more cards. You have a passive that creates a bunch of small guys. You have a 0-mana card that oftentimes you just play as a 0-mana 0/1 because, well, it's a 0-mana 1/2. If you have the standard bearer, for example, you can give a buff with the subjugate. It gets buffed by this, etc., etc. So your deck summons a bunch of dudes, goes white, and then you have a big buff with this guy. And you have another way of making white boards with Radiant Legion, because for every clone that you have in your bank, you can charge this, which reveal the clone from your bank, and then you create a 1/1 very iterant again, 1/1 clone. When you play the guy, it's also a master, so if you play this guy, you keep banking clones, you play your Scipius afterwards, it's also going to activate this and it's also going to summon more dudes. This is basically the core on the units of the deck, right? Then you have the relic, which is just a 2-mana relic that gives friendly clones +1/+1. Simple as it is, right? But incredibly powerful because, again, your passive that you summon basically for free every single turn is a 1/2 unit then. It's almost like a 3 1-mana unit that you summon every turn, and that can be combined with more buff cards. Memento of the Fallen, also one of the cards that just works very well if you have a lot of units, because it's a upgrade. You attach it to a unit, it gives +1/+1. If the unit dies on your turn, you give the upgrade to another unit, and then it's +2/+2, and it grows by 1 every single time you do this. And it only goes to the waste if you have no other unit to attach it to. And if it would be wasted in the enemy turn, even you get it back to your hand, right? It's a really crazy card that just makes all of these archetypes that go white on the board and play a bunch of units viable at the moment. And then we've mostly had a lot of ways to buff units, but outside of the Radiant Legion, there wasn't much to create many units at a time. Well, that is the one single effect that we play in the core of the deck, right? Triumph of Europa, where you waste the top 2 cards of your deck and then you play any number of units with a total of cost 5 or less from your waste. The rest of the text, the +1 is gone as well, also got nerfed, just updated on the side here, where I view the deck, right? And the last part also initially wasn't there, but also got nerfed, is that the unit would enter the waste, you remove it from the game instead, so you cannot, I don't know, play your Magna, resummon your Magna, it dies again, resummon again, resummon again. It used to be the case, it doesn't work anymore. Everybody who remembers those times probably has PTSD from them. But fundamentally, what does this really mean? So the baseline combo and idea of this is, right, you spend 5 mana to play this card and you summon units worth 5 mana. Doesn't sound too crazy, but it becomes pretty crazy if you, for example, resummon a Standard Bearer, you resummon a Cunning Scipi, and you resummon a 1-drop. That is 3 cards that you get instead of 1. And because you played this first, this is gonna buff this guy, it's gonna buff the iterant you summon, and it's gonna buff the 1-drop. So far, so good. You can also summon Tabula Rasas for 0, right? For 5 mana, okay, 5 energy. Okay, this costs 0, so you can summon all of these for free in combination with cards that buff. If you already have something like the Standard Bearer or the Subjugate on your board, you're gonna get even more buffs. Then the Subjugate, part of the effect is it wastes the top card of your deck whenever you summon a clone. This means if you play the Triumph and you have a Subjugate in play, or you summon a Subjugate and you keep summoning guys, you keep wasting more cards, and you might, for example, hit more Tabula Rasas, which you can summon for free, which then is going to trigger the Subjugate again and give more and more buffs. But that's a pretty strong combo. Another thing, especially surrounding the Tabula Rasa, which sounds like a not too impactful card, right? And I didn't get into it at the beginning because this is a bit harder to grasp, I think, especially if you're new to the game. But the master is you spend your remaining energy and reveal a friendly banked unit with the cost equal to the amount of the energy spent, and then this transforms into a clone copy of that unit. Okay, so if you get started and you play this deck, most of the time you will play this as a 0 mana, 0/1, and combine it with cards that buff. That will happen most of the time. But you can also, for example, bank something like a Drusian Accelerator on turn 1, 2, or something like that. You have 5 mana, you can then play this and it transforms into this. Or it transforms into this, or this, or this, right? So you can utilize it as a very flexible card and just play it, hit out your curve, etc. Okay, you'll find the spots for that, you'll see that and learn that. Now, the really powerful thing that you can do with Triumph of Europa especially is, if you have, I don't know, 7 mana, for example, you can play the Triumph, you have 2 mana left, and the first unit you summon can be a Tabula Rasa if you have a Standard Bearer in your bank, and then this will take the 2 energy that you have left, the 2 mana that you have left, and transform into this guy. And after that, you can go and spend the 5 energy that the Triumph of Europa allows you to spend and summon a bunch of other units and have even more buffs, right? Same idea works on 8 mana. If you summon a Tabula first, you can transform into a Subjugate. And this is especially powerful because that's something that can happen somewhat frequently, where you go for this play, you summon the Subjugate, maybe you summon a second Subjugate, and then you keep going for Tabulas, you keep wasting cards, you keep hitting more tabulas, more 1-drops, and you keep having crazy amount of buffs, right? Because let's say you started with 1 unit that can attack, you have 8 mana, you play the Triumph, you summon Subjugate, you summon the Subjugate from a Tabula, right? Summon another Subjugate, then you have 2 energy left, you already used 1 buff because the normal Subjugate summon could buff on the first, and you can summon 2 1-drops, and up to 2 other Tabula Rasas, so you can get up to +9/+9 on the unit that can attack if you have this kind of setup, which can just end the game, right? It's up to 9 burst damage. Maybe you can bank a card after you had the 8 mana play with the Triumph, and then you summon the passive token, another double buff. Maybe you can play another 1-drop afterwards, another double buff, right? So this basically covers the idea on what you want to do with the deck and the, like harder combos to see or to go for sometimes, because maybe this is something you can miss. Now, a tricky thing that you have to pay attention to, also surrounding the Tabula Rasa card and your Paragon, is that your Paragon will trigger all the non-Paragon master abilities that you've activated this game. So if it triggers Tabula Rasa and it finds a suitable target in your bank, it will transform into that target and your Scipius is gone. The effect stops and the card transforms into whatever it found, right? So you have to check your bank, and you have to have a energy amount left over after paying the 5 for the Scipi that is not matching anything in your bank. So if you have a Tabula Rasa in your bank, you cannot play your Scipi and have 0 left. If you have a 1-drop in your bank, cannot have 1. You have a 2-drop in your bank, cannot have 2. You have a 3-drop, cannot be 3. In rare cases, you want that to happen, that it transforms into it, right? But that is a pro level kind of thought. That's not really basic idea. What do you do about this? Usually the easy way people handle this is you literally never bank Tabula Rasas and you just play your Scipi with 0 energy left. That's the easy thing to do, but you can also obviously just check your bank. You have 6 energy, 6 mana, and there's no 1 cost. Okay, you can play the Scipi. There's no 2 cost. Okay, you have to bank first and then play the Scipi. Something like that. Okay, now let's talk a little bit about the tech card options that you have in the deck and how they work, why they work, when do you want to play that. Because the base deck just fundamentally play a bunch of buff cards, play a bunch of cards that summon things and overwhelm the opponent. Don't mess up on the Scipius Tabula Rasa things, and you can do some cool things combining the Triumph and the Tabula Rasas in the later stages of the game. Right, that's the TLDR. Now, what else do we play? What else can we do? So the deck doesn't really want to play a bunch of effect cards usually, because to trigger your passive you have to bank a unit. Right? You don't play many effects as a standard cards, right? I think this maybe should even make the cut for core. I've never cut this from the deck so far, but I can definitely see you not running it in certain meta games, because no snitching is mostly a counter to those low cost cards that have very powerful effects and very low stat lines that you need to do something about. 0 mana, very impactful, but you cannot really bank it and activate your passive. That doesn't work, so it can be kind of annoying. But yeah, no snitching. If people play high impact, low cost units, always going to be a tech card any kind of meta game. Disassembly Swarm is a really powerful removal tool because it just puts target unit on top of owner's deck, or if it's a Paragon or a token, it just disappears. That's how it currently is. I think in the future maybe that's going to be changed. Maybe the Paragon is actually going to go to the top of the deck, something like that. I've heard rumors of that in Twitch chats, so maybe it is changing. But currently Paragon's tokens just disappear, units are put at the top of the owner's deck. For 3 mana, very good removal tool, and you also force your opponent to top deck that unit, which can be really good. Maybe your opponent needs to draw a specific card and you can just deny them the top deck with them. This is very good versus especially Paragon reliant decks that really need their big unit to survive or do something, like Brand or Nehemiah, for example. Then Synchronicity, you play a copy of a target non-Paragon unit. So you can copy something, some of your own units, like on high mana turns, for example, Druid's Accelerator, you can play and then copy with this, and then you have +4 attack on all of your units and just end the game. You can copy something like a Magna, and then you play a second Magna, gets a second effect into the Scipi, and you can Triumph Magnas now 2 times because you have 2 Magnas, right? That can be really, really good. Oftentimes, you just want to synchro a powerful card that your opponent played, and you can utilize maybe some masters that your deck doesn't have access to, or you can just utilize some crazy mechanics. For example, Honored Steward and Shroud says it puts an enemy unit into the singularity. Now, because you don't have a singularity in Kefari, that unit just disappears. So this is like the main card that you want to play this versus, Honored Steward and Shroud. A lot of Shroud decks you play, then Synchronicity is an instant tech card versus that, because your Scipius Magnus Alpha is also going to get that Honored Steward effect, so it's also going to again remove enemy unit just from the game. Poof. Okay, that was a lot to the spell cards. I think there's more to say to the spell cards than a lot of these units. With the units, I think we can first look at the two Kefari ones, the Convergent Princet and the Convergent Domina. I mainly have them on like the tech card list because I don't necessarily think you need to include more convergence to make Recruiter worth it. Recruiter by itself is very much a fine card because Master, you get another clone and it gets into the Scipi and it's a deep unit. So Recruiter just does what the deck wants to do. You don't run out of cards, you keep refilling your board. Now, Recruiter gives you always a clone, and on top it can give you a Convergent. So if you don't need the other tech cards, if you just feel like, well, none of this really matters in the current meta, I'm just playing a lot of mirror matches, or I'm playing a lot of other aggro decks or something like that, cool. You can just put some Convergence into your deck and your Recruiters give you more draws. Most of the time you will just end up banking those cards, but obviously there are some niche scenarios where they can be really useful, and for example you can do some Tabula combos with the Domina in your bank. Now, Mercenary Gunslinger used to be mostly a tech card for the mirror, but because the current mirror it's very hard to kill the other player and it's a lot about just playing more stats than the other person, it's fallen out of favor a lot. It used to be very good that you can triumph and you summon some units that give you a lot of stats. Then you summon a Gunslinger and you kill an enemy unit, and then you don't die because your opponent doesn't just play some crazy buff card like Killbox. Killbox not really a meta card anymore. If Killbox kind of makes its way back into the meta, Gunslinger is a very good tech card for the mirror, but that is mostly what it is. It is not a bad card if you go second and your opponent obviously plays a 1-mana 2/1. It's going to be very nice to have it in that case, but yeah, it can be a tech card if the meta is mostly mirrors or a lot of 1 HP units, but it's a bit fallen out of favor to the consideration. Lord Half is basically a counter to Shroud and spell-based, effect-based decks, right? The cool thing that you can do here is, because it's not a clone, you can bank it and you can have Tabula transform into it, and then it becomes a clone and it also gets buffed by the Relic, for example, which is really troublesome for especially Shroud, because if this guy is buffed by the Relic, they have a tough time removing it, and they often have to spend one turn and a lot of mana playing a single target removal on this, while your rest, your other units are just going to survive and attack the other guy. So good tech card versus effect-based decks, mostly Shroud. Miasmancer is another really tricky card that I think is worth including though, because once you play your Scipi, it's going to repeat the masters that you played in order of which you played them. So if it kills the Miasmancer, it stops. Which, if Miasmancer is the last master that you played, perfect, nothing happens. But if you played masters after Miasmancer, those will not happen. So there's some anti-synergy with the Scipi here. But all keywords are disabled this turn, means versus, for example, Earthen with their indestructible defenders, you can, well, defenders disabled, you can just attack the other stuff, or you can attack the player. Very, very good. Or versus decks that rely heavily on playing masters, this can deny them a turn of doing what they want to be doing. And then you can play your Scipi and you deny them a second turn, which is probably they're dead, right? Like those decks don't survive 2 turns of doing nothing, especially versus a deck that puts so much pressure onto the board, like the Scipi Kefari deck here. So it's a really cool tech card versus like super master reliant decks, and versus especially Earthen if they want to hide behind formidable presence. Can also be pretty nice versus decks that play really big shielded units or shielded defenders, because you disable defender, right? It's again Terra Mech, for example, but you can do Miasmancer into Disassembly Swarm because disabling keywords means that disables shielded as well. So you can remove a Sesmir or a Terra Mech or something similar like that with the Miasmancer Disassembly Swarm combo, or you can Miasmancer into Synchronicity and you can copy your opponent's big threat basically. Saboteur, pretty self-explanatory, destroys target enemy relic. incredibly good in the mirror and versus any other deck that relies on relics. Surprisingly good versus Earthen, because that Altar of Gaia card is very, very good versus you, even though it might not like that at first. If you play a lot of games versus, you'll see how annoying it is to deal with a lot of the relics in the game. It's also a muster, so your Scipius is gonna repeat it. Just super nice to have. Now, this card hasn't really seen play in the deck in a very, very long time, but I think it's worth to include Asterglaive as like a potential tech card option, because it's a 4-mana unit, 3/6, right? If you play it from ahead, it is a really good counter to decks that want to go wide on the board, and is also a high HP shielded unit, which is pretty hard to remove for some decks. You can also do the Tabula combo, like with Lord Half, where you bank the Glaive and then you play Tabula Rasa. It transforms into a Glaive that is a clone. Could make it a 4/7 with the relic, or lets you buff it with the Drusian Accelerator and such. So I think this is worth including here, and it can be a cool tech card. I'm thinking of playing it more myself again currently. That's also why I kind of just put it here. Then we have Master Poisoner, probably one of the most staple tech cards when it comes to having a deck that has a bunch of small units and wants to kill big units, because any unit dealt damage in combat is destroyed. Means your 1/1 attacks the 10/10, the 10 dies. You have a 10/10 and you attack into a 1/1, your 10/10 is also gonna die. So you have to be a bit careful how to use this, but basically it is a very clean answer to everything that is playing big units that otherwise you would have trouble dealing with. And then we have Akara Rebel General, which is another muster, and he says deal damage to the enemy and heal yourself equal to the number of friendly units on the board. Now, this is mostly, again, a tech card for decks that want to hide behind something big or burn you out of the game, stuff like that. Which is mostly Earthen hiding behind Formidable Presence, trying to kill you, where they go big unit, Formidable Presence, hit you, big unit hits you the next turn, another Formidable Presence, hit you again, something like that. Because with Akara, your opponent ignored your board for a turn, you play it, you heal up, maybe your opponent tries to damage you again, you play a Scipi, repeat it, heal up again, deal more damage to the opponent. So it is really good in those matchups and slow matchups where you just need like a little bit of direct damage to close out the game, which is nice versus decks that don't have much access to healing, or versus decks that want to kill you with burn damage after they have given up on the board. So this can be good versus some Cathy variations as well. For example, some of them do tend to give up board, and then they have, I don't know, 2 turns, maybe 3 turns before they would die themselves. Your board control and your units attacking them, but they can play some burn cards, and then yeah, if the time is enough and they find enough burn cards, they win. Akara can change that clock by killing the opponent quicker or healing yourself out of range. Now, on the tech card section of this, I want to give a honorary mention to Wong, because I think a lot of people like this card in Scipi. I really don't like it in Scipi. I feel like you end up drawing too many cards sometimes with this, and I think Recruiter is a more efficient way of just rebuilding a board and having a wide board that is really hard for the opponent to deal with, and it's a clone and all these synergies, etc, etc. And it's a cheap card as well. It's not a 5-mana card. So I'm not the biggest fan of this, but I want to give it an honorary mention because some people probably really like the card, and kind of there goes that. I think the issue is that if you, for example, play a Magna and you play a Recruiter and you resummon Magna with Triumph and then you play Wong, you literally draw too many cards. And maybe your hand is too full, or you reduce the amount of turns that you have in the game, because you do die to being out of cards and taking damage every turn, and similar. So I don't like it that much, because then you don't want to play the Recruiters anymore and whatnot. I think Recruiters are just more consistent card draw, but if you're a fan of the card, stop you playing it. I think it's worth mentioning it, mostly because I wanted to highlight the downsides of, you have this early game where you play Recruiter into Magna, something like that. It often is you draw too many cards, but if you lack card draw in the early game, then you have this on turn 5 while still having had efficient turns before. Very, very powerful setup. Okay, this was maybe a bit long and maybe a bit dry of a video. If you want to see a lot of gameplay to the game and chat with me live and ask questions about the deck, etc., streaming a lot on Twitch, and you can always find me there. That is the best way for, especially like a lot of these gameplay things, but I wanted to give you a deep overview of the deck, how it works, what you think, and especially how the different cards, combos, and tech card choices work. you can make educated decisions on how to play the deck and how to approach playing the deck, not only currently in this specific patch by giving you like, here's a deck list, copy this, do this, but giving you a deep understanding. So if there are some minor changes, patch notes, whatever in the future, you still maintained all your knowledge and you're ready and set to keep winning games by just swapping some cards because you understand, okay, this guy is buffing my other stuff, so maybe I should put something else that buffs my other things if this guy is too bad now. I used to summon a lot of things, maybe I should put something else that summons a lot of things, like we've recently seen with, for example, Venturus being nerfed, which was a resummon, rebuild your board card, and now everybody's playing Radiant Legion that wasn't played before, for example. I appreciate everybody hanging out. I hope this provided value to you, like I said before. It was a bit dry, but trust me, it really is worth it to understand and really get behind why is this strong, why do you do this, how do you play this, and it is not as easy of a deck as it might seem at the beginning, because you oftentimes have to really figure out how to manage your resources, what to do with Tabula Rasas, what kind of combos to set up, etc, etc. If you want to learn more, catch me on Twitch, and I'll see you in the next video.